the change, and change is coming.
The rebellion began 2 years ago, but it didn't seem like a milestone at first. A 15-year-old girl appears alone in front of the Swedish parliament with a handmade sign that reads, "School Strike for Climate." She will become the symbol of a generation.
You say you love your children above all else, and yet you're stealing their future in front of their very eyes.
5,000 kilometers away in India, one of the world's leading scientists sees that picture and senses a moment in history.
Just the beginning of seeing a young person raise their voice and with outrage.
In Sudbury, an 11-year-old girl sees the same picture and becomes the first student in Canada to strike. Soon, there will be millions around the world.
I knew about climate change all my life, but I didn't understand how important the issue was until I heard Greta Tunberg speak. What's the point of going to school and studying for a future that I can't live in due to the climate crisis?
In Washington, a 16-year-old student stands alone in the rain in front of the White House. Soon, he will be at the center of a storm.
At first, I got so many mean looks. People just looking and saying, "Oh, he's out here talking about this hoax." I heard hoax like 20 times the first hour I was there.
In England, a scientist decides to break the law. Soon, she will shut down the city of London.
Conscientious protection. This is what it looks like.
And a 92-year-old TV legend, revered for his uplifting nature films, delivers a dark warning instead.
The collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon.
Soon, nothing is going to be the same. I've seen many protest movements in my day, but not like this, with so many forces converging. Look at this. Millions are marching in big cities, small towns, villages. It's a tide of anger and hope, led by school children and teenagers, as we witness what many are already calling a climate rebellion. In this extraordinary year, I watched a generation awake and demand the right to a future. And I watched it come together from such small beginnings. In England, a loose-knit group called Extinction Rebellion is holding a climate demonstration in front of Parliament. It's only 3 months after Greta Thunberg began her solitary strike. Now, her protest is about to take on a new dimension.
It is now time for civil disobedience.
It is now time for civil disobedience.
It is time to rebel.
It is time to rebel.
This moment has become famous as the Declaration of Rebellion. What starts happening is extraordinary. Extinction Rebellion blockades 5 bridges leading into the city. They chain themselves to the stock exchange, even to the gates of Buckingham Palace. They're nonviolent, but dramatic. They spray fake blood on the Treasury. Millions hate them for the gridlock they cause, but millions also see them as heroes. Britain's capital was paralyzed by a series of actions by a group hardly anyone had ever heard of, who seemed able to strike anywhere, anytime. I found the modest headquarters of Extinction Rebellion on a drab street in central London. and finally met Gail Bradbrook, the scientist who is supposedly terrorizing England.
I've been thinking about the need for mass civil disobedience. I knew that we had mass systemic problems that show up in many different ways, the environmental crisis perhaps being the most obvious, but the depth of inequality in the world is also another thing. You know, the fact that 8 people have the same wealth as half of the world's population is so utterly ridiculous. So I've been looking for other people who were kind of, if you like, mad enough to try and start a rebellion.
You're a disgrace and you're killing the planet.
What are you hoping to get done as a consequence of this?
First of all, tell the truth. We're in an absolute crisis. The media is still not fully telling the truth, and certainly governments are not telling the truth to the population.
What gives you hope?
Somebody once called it hopium. What gives me hope is by taking action, because an existential threat means you have to step forwards. And actually, I think it's quite a useful way of thinking about this. We have to go onto a war footing.
So hope and a sense of theater put Gail Bradbrook in front of the Ministry of Transport one day with a hammer.
I do not want to be destroying things. I want to be repairing things. We will do all we can to defend her, because the highest law comes from nature.
Who decided to get up there?
Me. I knew that I wanted to do something that would capture the attention of the press. I mean, frankly, that is part of the job of civil disobedience. And also stand on the shoulders of our history of civil resistance. To me, minor property damage, you know, it's one pane of glass. It turns out it's quite an expensive pane of glass, actually. But it's nothing compared to the devastation of nature.
Extinction Rebellion has over 1,100 groups in 72 countries.
This is the New York City Police Department. You are ordered to leave the roadway. You will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct.
But different countries require different tactics. This is India.
Here, to block roads really doesn't make sense because they're already blocked.
Bavreen Kandari is the founder of Extinction Rebellion, India.
Lying down and pretending to be dead and all that, it doesn't work. Believe me, even if 1,000 people will pretending to be dead, it's not going to affect the government at all.
So, one of her weapons is children. When government bulldozers came to cut down 16,000 mature trees, she deployed her secret army.
Decimators were there to cut the trees, and these huge, beautiful 100-year-old trees. And because the children climbed them, the government had to back off. And the next day, we got a stay in the court for tree felling, no tree felling, and all over Delhi. So it was a big win, and those trees are standing there tall only because of these wonderful children.
We don't see them in Western media, but there have been hundreds of local climate protests in India.
Over 90 cities all over India have joined in, and now they connect with each other. It's just very normal people. That's the beauty about this, that we are all citizens, and we are all so desperate for change.
Meanwhile, in Katowice, Poland, the United Nations Climate Conference warns we have only 12 years to avert climate catastrophe. And while teenage rebellion sweeps the world, an elderly figure takes the stage.
Please welcome Sir David Attenborough. Sir, you have the floor.
He has been voted the most trusted man in Britain, and for 50 years, he has shown us the wonders of the world, but not today.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale. Our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. Well, that particular statement, I've been saying things like that certainly since the beginning of this century. So I've been saying that for 20 years, and nobody took a blind bit of notice. Now, you must have been doing it for 20 years, and suddenly the bell rings. And what it is that makes a difference, I don't know. People's jaw sagged, and there was a sort of feeling of, you can't be serious, you know. But we're serious, all right, you and I. Suddenly people are hearing, and suddenly young people, particularly, are saying it out loud. And they're saying to the older generation, which I guess contains us both, say, what have you been doing? How could you let this happen? You knew about it. How can you let it happen?
Across the Atlantic, one group is not letting it happen without a fight.
My name is Varshini Prakash. I am the executive director and one of the co-founders of Sunrise Movement. This is a revolution that has been in the making for decades.
So Varshini Prakash and 200 other members of Sunrise Movement occupy the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, demanding she support a Green New Deal.
We have 12 years. Give us a Green New Deal now. Yes.
The Green New Deal tackles the three most prevalent crises of our day, that of the climate crisis, that of economic inequality, and that of racial injustice. It is a plan that says no one will be left behind, not workers in this great transition, not communities of color, not indigenous people, not low-income people who have, for the entirety of American history, often been left out of moments of great economic prosperity.
The pressure on North American politicians will heat up now as Greta Thunberg arrives to lead a month of protest. Her first stop is Washington, where a group of student activists is meeting the Senate Democratic Caucus. Sophia Mathur has traveled 1,300 kilometers to be there too.
Wait, Canada?
You did?
Actually,
Where did you come from?
Sudbury, Ontario, so it's about 4 hours away from Toronto. And I don't always think about me, myself, I think about the we, like Fridays for Future. I think of us as making a difference. Greta being here today is just so important.
The urgency that I think your activism is bringing to this issue is really important.
The climate crisis is urgent.
My name is Greta Tunberg. I am a climate activist. Don't invite us here to just tell us how inspiring we are without actually doing anything about it. I know you are trying, but just not hard enough. And sorry.
Jerome Foster, who stood alone before the White House, is not being ignored anymore. These Democrats are listening.
I want to ask what timeline or immediate action you guys are planning on having after this conference that us young people at this table and us young people all around behind you can support in the work that you guys are doing.
The world is about to see the scale of the generational revolt. In New York and around the world, they're preparing for a week of massive global protest. It's all run by teenagers, but who are they? One of them is Olivia Wohlgemuth, who just turned 17.
September 20th is designed to be a catalyst, and that's how we do it in New York, sorry. 2020 is a big, big deal for my generation. In 2020, I'm going to be able to vote for the first time in my first election. 2020 is a landmark. 2020 is the election that everybody's talking about. It's the election that my generation is going to turn the tables.
The New York protest is big, very big. 200,000 demonstrators converge. Among them is Sophia Mathur.
There's a lot of kids just like me. They knew that the climate crisis was real. They just didn't know what to do. It's the revolution of the youth. It's the climate revolution.
Because this is only the beginning.
It is only the beginning. An even bigger protest is shaping 500 kilometers away in Montreal. A virtual army is preparing.
My name is Linnea. I'm 17 years old, and I'm involved with Extinction Rebellion Youth Quebec. There's people whose whose lives have been turned upside down by the climate crisis. There's people even just in this province who've lost their homes. We're not even talking about globally how there are going to be 300 million refugees by 2050. So really, who cares about my CV? Who cares about the fact that eventually a boss might see that I was arrested for climate justice? I kind of don't want to work for a place that doesn't accept that in the first place.
The next morning, I'm with the media as Greta Thunberg arrives from New York. There's a lot of momentum to this climate movement, but I wonder, can it last? Almost 30 years ago, there was an earlier worldwide climate movement and another teenager who was the first Greta.
Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future.
That was my daughter, Severn, speaking at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992.
If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it.
But that momentum faded. Can that happen again?
There are some major differences between my generation when I was a youth and Greta's generation, and one of the biggest ones is social media. At Rio, climate change was on the horizon. It was identified as a coming problem, but we had yet to really feel it. I don't think the momentum is going to stop. Climate change is here, and it's affecting all of us, and it's only going to get worse.
Right now, Greta has the attention of the world, and the movement is surging.
I just want to thank you for coming to Canada, and I just wanted to also say hello for my daughter. I don't know if you know Severn Cullis Suzuki, who spoke in Rio. That's my daughter, and she sends her best.
Yeah, I received a letter from her.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. She'll be very happy. My generation should never have left the problem for you to do. Thank you for...
Thank you.
I'm seeing hundreds of thousands massing at the foot of Mount Royal as Greta joins the march, which now stretches back 4 kilometers.
Look at that. Wow. Wow.
Over and over again, these kind of mass displays do have an impact. I think the difference between this one, though, and others, young people are driving this, and it's about their very survival in the future.
future. That is one of the biggest demonstrations in history. The people have spoken, and we will continue to speak until our leaders listen and act. We are the change, and change is coming.
But people aren't just marching. Elsewhere, celebrities like Jane Fonda are attacking the pillars of financial power.
Why are they still drilling and fracking and mining? And why are the big Wall Street banks and other international financial institutions still helping them drill and frack and mine?
In Washington, actor Jane Fonda is leading protests at the Capitol against the big banks that finance the oil industry.
Chase is one of the worst banks in the world in terms of funding the expansion of fossil fuel, of the drilling, of the mining, of the fracking. They're giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry.
A parade of Hollywood stars has joined her, like Joaquin Phoenix and Martin Sheen, who played the President of the United States in The West Wing.
There's no conscience in companies, but there is conscience in the people that work in them and for them, and people that invest in them. And so what we're trying to do is awaken their spirit. It's making people aware that their investments are helping destroy the environment.
Indigenous leaders like Canada's Ariel Deranger have also come.
These companies are not just funding climate change, but they're funding the destruction and abrogation of treaty and Aboriginal rights in Canada. They're funding the destruction of people's homelands and territories that we've known since time immemorial.
Next, I go home and continue to work on this issue, continue to work with the grassroots, frontline community members that are challenging the largest ever proposed tar sands mine.
Oh, Jerome.
Jerome Foster is here today, too.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be your godmother.
I remember like the first strike I did in February, it was just by myself at the White House and just like no one was here. Now it's like so many people have joined on, and like Jane Fonda especially has like revolutionized like how adults see the climate movement. And now it's like mothers, fathers, and like grandmothers and grandfathers, so it's amazing.
But one person is missing here, a pioneer of the climate movement.
Today, the most fateful battle in human history is finally joined, and we will fight it together.
Bill Mckibben is a journalist and organizer who stands out across 30 years of climate action. And he's in a tiny Dunkin' Donuts shop nearby, about to invade one of the most powerful banks in the world.
I've got such a big enough Twitter following and stuff that I can sort of get news out fast.
That should be clear, and Liz will be the point person on the inside.
Joining him is civil rights leader Reverend Lennox Yearwood. For him, climate protest and racial justice are one and the same issue.
And so this must stop. You cannot continue to fund a business and a business model that is causing destruction, not only to our planet, but to our community. And so we are gathered here as citizens, literally doing what we can do to put our bodies against the machine to bring it to a halt. And if that means getting arrested, then so be it.
Hello there. Can we speak to the manager, please?
Yes, I'm the manager.
Defund climate change, stop funding fossil fuels.
Chase is, as you know, the biggest funder of fossil fuels in the country. So we have a letter we'd like you to send back to New York to Jamie Dimon. And we're just going to wait here for a while and see what kind of answer we get.
Well, unfortunately, you can't hang out in the badge, but I will take care of this for you.
You can introduce.
We're not going to leave.
Okay, baby.
Hey, Chase, take a stand. No destruction on sacred land. Hey, Chase, take a stand. No destruction on sacred land.
I'm going to give you Bill Mckibben. He is currently occupying the Chase Bank.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me there? Greetings from about a half mile away. There's about 25 of us inside the bank branch. If banks like Chase Bank stopped funding the fossil fuel industry, they could not go on building pipelines. They could not go on making new coal mines and doing all the other things that are making our planet week by week less habitable. The police have just arrived here, but we're going to be here for a while. Good luck with all that you're doing down there on Capitol Hill. We love you.
Stop the money pipeline!
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the bank has asked you to leave. If you don't leave, you will be placed under arrest.
Outside, the police cordon off the bank and arrest Bill Mckibben and the Reverend Yearwood. Mckibben has been fighting the fossil fuel industry for decades, and he says that the industry knew what was coming, and they covered it up.
We now know from great investigative reporting that they forecast with stunning accuracy what the temperature would be in 2020, what the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere would be. Instead of fessing up, instead of admitting what their scientists had told them, they began the multi-billion-dollar job of telling probably the most significant lie in human history. For 30 years, they've been able to keep us from making progress, to the point where Donald Trump thinks that climate change is a hoax manufactured by the Chinese, a delusion grand enough that if you were sitting on the bus next to someone muttering that, you'd get up and change seats.
And so, he launched the divestment movement.
We're going to ask or demand that institutions like colleges or churches sell their stock in these companies. The logic could not be simpler. If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage.
The divestment movement has swept over 100 university campuses.
We are students from Columbia University, Boston University, Brown University, Northwestern University.
And we're calling on our university to divest from the fossil fuel industry.
City governments and churches around the world have joined the movement, even the Venerable Church of England itself.
It becomes ever clearer that climate change is the greatest challenge that we and future generations face, a true horseman of the apocalypse.
And just this year, Pope Francis himself urged all Catholic bishops to divest any fossil fuel stocks their dioceses hold. The divestment movement has been so successful that over 1,200 institutions have withdrawn $14 trillion from fossil fuel investments. At the Bank of England, former Governor Mark Carney is convinced the fossil fuel era is ending.
You're not going to have financial stability. In other words, you're not going to have the economy if you don't have a planet. And that's something that the financial markets now are increasingly focused on. We're starting from where we are today. We need to get to a world of net zero. It's actually the law of the land in the United Kingdom. It's been passed by Parliament back home in Canada. There's 120 countries around the world have said they want to get to net zero. This has moved from being an issue that is, maybe in the top 10 to being the top issue.
Sir David Attenborough is also sensing the beginnings of a shift.
The big multinationals exercise huge power, and that's both good and bad, because multinationals actually don't have to wait for electorates. One or two key figures in the multinational world, if they were to change their mind, a snap of the fingers, and the word would go out and change would happen, because that's what multinationals can do. And my impression is that there are one or two key multinationals who suddenly see the writing on the wall.
But multinationals are driven by the need to make a profit.
They won't make a profit if they go on with the present policies. I really believe some see that. They have a sufficiently sophisticated understanding of the way the world works to know that they can't go on milking a particular cow in certain ways. That they have actually now got to think about the welfare of the cow, because if the cow dies, there's no milk.
While the oil industry was denying the climate facts, another industry was helping them, the media. One of the world's leading environmental writers, England's George Monbiot, has damning words for his own profession.
As an environmental journalist, you are unwelcome almost everywhere in the media.
I spent literally 30 years banging my head against the brick wall of the UK's broadcast media, trying to persuade them to do documentaries on environmental issues. And I was driven away not just with polite no thank yous, but with streams of expletives.
It wasn't much better on the US channels. One major network, ABC, gave the birth of royal baby Archie more coverage in a week than they gave climate change in an entire year.
These climate change alarmists have been wrong about just about everything. All of their charts have been debunked.
It seems like there's science on both sides of this issue.
One of the major forces in climate denial is the powerful Fox News network.
Something you can't see, but it's deadlier than Godzilla and Vladimir Putin combined. It's global warming, and it's going to kill us all.
So if you were to ask me, who has done more harm to the living planet, the fossil fuel companies or the media companies? I would say the media companies.
One British newspaper, however, pushed back. The Guardian, with a global readership of 24 million, threw its editorial weight against the oil companies and made it impossible to open The Guardian without oil dripping down the page and vivid art of the planet on fire. The Guardian's rebellion has spread around the media world. Over 400 media outlets declare they will cover the climate as an emergency priority. One of the biggest is the Hindustan Times in India. Jayashri Nandi is their climate reporter.
We will not call it climate change because words matter. We'll call it climate crisis so that our readers realize what a big story this is. We are seeing more heat waves, more extreme rainfall events, more floods, more landslides. It's really alarming. India is one of the most vulnerable to climate change. And it's just a matter of time when the people here realize and start demanding action.
She doesn't have to go far to see the vulnerable population. Bavreen Kandari, founder of Extinction Rebellion India, lives virtually next door to them.
We're sitting right now in a very, nice, posh, lovely colony. And just next door, the next colony, if I'll take you, there are these children and people who are living on an open drain. One of the open drains in Delhi that is used methane gas 24/7. Children and people can join movements, Right to Breathe or Fridays for Future or Delhi Trees SOS. Do they even care? These people don't even know whether they're going to get the next meal. It's not possible for them to worry about environmental problems because they are living in a hell.
Scenes like this are going to be growing exponentially as the planet heats up from Western countries filling the atmosphere with CO2. The result will be a global refugee crisis, according to one of the world's leading climate scientists, Sunita Narain.
A minuscule number of people in the world have disproportionately, completely disproportionately occupied a space of the global atmosphere. Okay? 30% of the global atmospheric space is being occupied by one country, the United States. Your country, Canada, is equally to blame. Minuscule number of people, massive footprint. So now we've run out of carbon budget. Now we have a climate change crisis. You don't have any place on the table anymore. Go die. People are not going to go and die. They're going to migrate. They're going to leave their villages because they're doing so today with the extreme rain events we are seeing. We are seeing more and more people moving to cities, moving to countries. You are really looking at a world which will become more insecure because we refuse to accept the fact we live in one world. We have to deal with this as a global citizen.
Sunita Narain is about to be proven right. It is one world. Suddenly, the streets of the world are empty, and we are locked into our own solitudes. One microorganism is all that it took to paralyze the great cities of the planet and overwhelm the morgues. For Varshini Prakash's Sunrise Movement, Earth Day was supposed to be the apex of their climate rebellion.
We were going to have 2 million young people participate in the Earth Day strikes. We were gearing up to have office sit-ins in hundreds of congressional offices across the country. We wanted a mobilization that could rival the first Earth Day that we had in American history in 1970, where 20 million people participated in some capacity.
Olivia Wohlgemuth's organizing drive crumbled.
That was terrifying for me and my friends because we had just been going full speed ahead, nonstop, basically for this past year, building up to this huge global day of action on Earth Day, and suddenly none of that was going to be possible.
Jerome Foster is alone again.
It's like we're going back to square zero. A lot of people are tuned out because of economic issues. A lot of people are tuned out for personal issues. I know that one of my family members passed away from coronavirus recently, and it was crazy because I knew I had to organize, but I also knew that this is a pandemic and we can't not take it seriously.
Fridays for Future moved to vivid social media. For Sophia Mathur in Canada, the only options are now symbolic.
Well, the shoe strike symbolizes a whole bunch of people at a rally. The idea was from Sweden. It's called Shoe Strike for Climate. We even put signs up like reboot the economy, step up for the climate, and reduce your carbon footprint.
For Gail Bradbrook of Extinction Rebellion, the pandemic was no surprise.
The COVID crisis is an ecological crisis, right? I mean, we know that these zoonotic diseases emerge in relationship to changes in biodiversity and our relationship with our animal cousins and so on. It's not a separate crisis. It's a lesson in the fact that nature's in charge.
And the COVID crisis is revealing a huge social divide. Black Americans are dying at nearly 3 times the rate of white Americans. Reverend Yearwood's message, linking the COVID crisis and systemic racism, has become all too plain.
We're seeing that systemic racism, in many cases, has allowed for communities to be broken down. They're broken down because of their health, they're broken down because of their education, they're broken down because of their housing. They're broken down and they're literally teetering, and so they're just trying to make it day by day.
Then one day in Minneapolis, the pandemic silence is broken. The murder of George Floyd by police brought the streets to life again.
Sheer rage at a system that consistently and constantly brutalizes Black people just became too much, and it reached a fever pitch and spilled over to turn that moment into something that quite literally changed the consciousness of America and the world.
Black Lives Matter! After so many years of Black people being gunned down, finally people are stepping up and saying something. And it felt like a huge relief that people were actually standing up. It felt like this is a time of actual change, that people are willing to sacrifice, even in a time of pandemic, to go out here and march with us.
Olivia is marching again.
When I saw the explosion of this movement right now, I felt that it was absolutely necessary. You can't look at the fight for climate justice without looking at the fight for racial justice, because the two of them are tied together so intrinsically.
This movement had become a predominantly white movement, and so this movement hadn't understood the cries of those who are poor Black people, or even the cries of those who are poor white people, which is why a lot of people sometimes don't trust this movement, because it doesn't seem like a movement for them.
It was very isolating when I went to these meetings and saw that there were only people that weren't of color there. We want to see ourselves reflected in a movement.
Now we see that changing. We do see that this movement may have gotten it right. This movement is now beginning to understand what it means to take care of humanity. Yes, we all need polar bears, and we love polar bears. Nothing wrong with a polar bear. But it's a time for us to care about our brothers and sisters on this planet.
When you organize around people and you organize around not graphics or numbers, but around stories and storytelling, then you have a huge impact when you talk about these things.
And it was different because we saw black people and white people and brown people and red people, straight or gay, theist, atheist. We saw humans at this time all coming together, which made it different. It made it somehow so very different.
We are many, they are few.
The waves of protest go on for weeks and cross oceans. Gail Bradbrook of Extinction Rebellion sees a tipping point. She's just not sure which way things are leaning.
We're in a transformational moment, and my understanding is that complex systems do one of two things. When they get deeply complex, they either emerge into a new form, and that's what I'm hoping and praying for. Another thing is that they collapse and go into a mess, and that's what fascism would look like. It feels more likely that the second thing, that the fascism is more likely. The polarisation that's emerged is showing us just how deeply those roots of anti-Semitism and misogyny and racism are embedded in our society. And what I think any of us can do is really focus on our own togetherness, our connections with each other.
The pandemic crisis has revealed vast social divides. And that's just a hint of what will happen if we allow the climate crisis to escalate and trigger massive poverty and climate migrations. But at this global tipping point, I have also witnessed the almost unprecedented rise of a new generation. A generation with extraordinary energy, passion, and conviction that is demanding transformation.
I say watch out for this next generation, because they are coming at you with every bit of power and fight and fire that they've got, because they understand, and we understand, that our future is on the line.